So today I am here chilling with the Open NAS. This particular model they call the Slate R12 Pro, and they claim that it can do everything you need in a home lab all in one box. And that's a pretty bold claim, I think. So I'm going to have to do a whole lot of different things with this thing in this video. So just a short list of specs. This guy has an Intel i5-13500 processor, an Intel W680 workstation class motherboard. It's got 12 drive bays. It's available in both 2.5 and 3.5. I got the 3.5 version. They can do SAS, SATA, and 4 of them can do U.2 as well, which is for NVMe storage in a 2.5-inch bay, which is really cool. It's also got some onboard PCIe Gen 4 and Gen 5 slots for a whack ton of expansion. They've got this thing all kitted out to be a storage server, a media server, basically everything you want. So anyway, if you guys want to see all the things I can pack into the server at once, then come along on this adventure. Full disclosure, Open NAS sent me this unit for free for review. They sent it exactly in the production spec, so I brought my own hard drives and my own NVMe and my own operating system. They did give me the Lay's Ketchup Chips though, although they're kind of weird. I did also add a few add-in cards of my own in the PCIe slots. So I'll let you know which cards came with it and which ones I added on my own. They also won't see this review until you do, of course. Now let's get on to the unboxing. So this box is a little bit too big for the table, so might have to do an unboxing on the ground here. Let me get this thing out and we can take a look at it. Got a box that says Open NAS. Inside here I got Lay's Ketchup. Is this some kind of Canadian thing? Oh, this company's from Toronto, by the way. So I've never seen these in the US. I've seen them in Canada. I've never seen them in the US. So, ketchup Lay's chips in hand. I have now got this thing freed from its packaging. Was in there really well, so it didn't get damaged in shipment. And let's see what's in its nice little thing. How do I open this? Okay, I got the back. Okay, so now that I got this thing going, let's take a look at the hardware we've got to work with here. Now it's kind of complex, so I've got my own notes up here. I'll probably put these in the description below. So first off, there's 2 different case models, and within that there's the Pro and the non-Pro version of the backplanes. So I have the R12 model. This is the 3.5-inch bays, 12 3.5-inch bays. The other option is the D12, which has 2.5-inch bays all lined up vertically here. Of that, the base model, no Pro, is all SATA. So these backplanes are SATA. So they're connected to SATA on the motherboard and SATA in a host bus adapter. The Pro version, the backplanes are tri-mode. So all 12 slots support SATA and SAS, and some of the slots also support NVMe. So on mine, the R12, these guys on the top, these 4, can do U.3 NVMe, and that goes back to a PLX chip. On the 2.5-inch version, 8 of the slots can do that, so it's a bit of an upgrade. So in SATA mode and in SAS mode, these do support hot swap. In NVMe mode, it does not appear to support rescanning the PCI bus correctly. Not entirely sure why, but it works fine for SATA and SAS. Also would like to point out that the PLX chip and the PLX card do appear to electrically support PCI hot plug for the U.2s. However, software side is very tricky. I was not able to get Linux to recognize my NVMe drive moving it around between slots and stuff. So your mileage may vary on that. So turning it on its side here reveals it's not that deep. So this dimension here is only 14 inches without the handles, or whatever that is in metric. And if you're the kind of person like me that has a 2-post network rack in your home, this shallow depth server will be absolutely amazing. So this form factor is great for me because I have this little 2-post network rack here. Like 6 years ago, I thought this would be perfectly adequate for all of my needs because at the time I had 2 U of patch panels and 2 U of switches, and I added 1 U of UPS and a 2 U shelf, and had all kinds of empty space. And that's just not true anymore, so now I've got 4 U of patch panels, 2 U of patch boxes, 3 U of switches, a 2 U shelf, and 1 empty space. So unfortunately the Open NAS won't fit in my rack right now, but Do you guys think I should replace it from a 12U to an 18U maybe to fit more space? But if you have this style of rack, this two-post wall mount rack, the open NAS would fit great because it's not very deep. But if you're the kind of person that has like a full 42U data center at your house, maybe you would not appreciate that it's so tall, because it's 6U's tall, it'll use quite a lot of your rack. However, it's designed to put the PC equipment up on top of the drives. So the bottom 2U down here are the drives, at least on my system. On the D12 it's a little bit taller. And then the top 4U is dedicated just to the PC equipment. So with the Pro backplanes on my unit, the SAS and SATA connectors are SFF8643. That's a really common SAS connector. So of the 12 drives, my unit has the top 4 drives wired directly to the SATA on the chipset. So we're using the 4 SATA connectors on the motherboard for those drives. And then I've also got a board in here that's on the PCI slot. That's an ASMedia ASM1166. This is PCI Gen 3 by 2 lanes to 6 SATA, and then it's got a port multiplier on top of that to get us 8 lanes of SATA. Now, that will be a little bit bottlenecked if you're trying to push that hard with like SSDs, but for spinning Rust, and again, this is the 3.5-inch version, that's perfectly fine. So for the U.3's NVMe's, so the top 4 bays can do U.3, so it's U.2 SAS intercompatible. For that, the backplane has 2 SFF8654 connectors. I hate remembering those numbers, but that's basically 8 lanes of PCI Express on a connector. There's 2 of those connectors, so we get 16 lanes for the 4 drives. So those 16 PCIe lanes get routed to the CPU via a PCI Express switch. So there's a PLX technology, PEX 8748. That's a 48-port PCIe multiplier. Now that card that they've chosen here supports PCIe Gen 3 all around. So it's got 16 upstream ports and 32 downstream ports. So if you put it in a PCI X16 slot, you get 16 lanes back to the CPU, and then you get 32 lanes downstream. Of that, they're using 16 of those lanes to go to the 4 U.2, U.3s on the backplane, and the other 2 connectors, which are 16 lanes combined, are open. So I'm guessing on the D12 model, those are also going to be used. So if you want, you have 16 more PCIe lanes via those SFF8654 connectors. Just searching around a bit, I found some cables that break this out to like 2 Oculink or 2 U.2, if that's the kind of thing you want to use. And you can go from Oculink to like a PCIe slot as well to hold a GPU or something like that. However, on this motherboard, the slot that it's in is only running at PCIe by 3 by 8 because there are no by 16 slots on this motherboard. There's only by 8s. The primary by 16 is split up into 2 by 8 lanes. So we're running it at PCIe Gen 3 by 8. We get that bandwidth across 32 downstream lanes if you want. So effectively, if you populate all 4 of the U.3s, you get PCIe Gen 3 by 2 lanes each back to the CPU. However, since it's running through a PLX chip, if you populate less of those drives, they get more bandwidth each, up to PCIe Gen 3 by 4 lanes per drive. Now, in addition to the 12 drive bays on the front, there's also 2 M.2s on the motherboard. Those are both PCIe Gen 4 by 4 lanes, so blazing fast. And as a bonus, the case has 5 spots for 2.5-inch drives if you want to screw them in on the inside. You could use this for more U.2s. For example, if you bought the SATA-only version, you could put some U.2 cache drives in here. There is clearance up to 15 millimeters to the case, so you can put in the thicker drives. You would probably have to add some sort of add-in card, though, for SATA for this, or do a little bit of different wiring on your end. There's a couple different options you have there. I like that it's part of the case. It's also easily removable with only 3 screws if you're going to take it off to mount the drives, or just take it off entirely. So if I'm going to talk about the Open NAS being the all-in-one server, it better replace all of my other servers. So despite the fact that this shelf is full of junk, there's actually only 2 servers on it. I got this one here. This is my Ugreen DXP4800. This runs my house, so I got Home Assistant, Frigate, my NAS, all that kind of good stuff. This has got 2 1 terabyte M.2s and 2 16 terabyte SATA drives. Now I could have saved a little bit of money if I used SAS drives, but then I could have used the Ugreen. So with the Open NAS, with the right HBA, I could have used SAS drives, which I would have liked. Down on that end, I have the backup server. That's an old, ancient HP micro server that uses an absolute ton of power. It's got 4 10 terabyte SAS drives, it's a 30 terabyte Z pool, and it also has over SAS the tape drive. So I could move that card over. It's an HBA that has an external SAS connector. I could move that over to the Open NAS and have tape as well. all of these drives. Also, they could move over. I could use like the bottom row for my backup drives. I could use the middle row for my bulk hard drives. And the top row, I could get some U.2s to replace M.2s because, at least in my experience, U.2s are a cheaper way to get enterprise storage than M.2s. That's just my thought. So this is the kind of thing I'd be replacing to go from what I have now to an all-in-one open NAS. So moving up a bit to the top layer of this thing, we've got the real like meat and potatoes here. CPU, motherboard, that kind of stuff. So I'm sure you guys are going to argue about this in the comments below. These guys have chosen to use a desktop CPU with a workstation class motherboard to get some of the advantages of both. Now, of course, you don't get all the advantages of a desktop or all the advantages of a server, somewhere in between. So the desktop CPU they've chosen for this is an Intel i5 13500. So this guy has 6 Intel P cores and 8 Intel E cores for a total of 20 threads. And if you're on a Linux-based operating system like Proxmox, any of that kind of stuff, it'll run just fine with P cores and E cores. Now, because it's a desktop CPU, it also has a relatively high boost clock of 4.8 gigahertz for the P cores. Slight downside to using desktop CPUs is we have less PCIe lanes total. So we have 16 lanes at Gen 5, plus more lanes at Gen 4, some of them off the CPU and some of them off the chipset. And these are really fast lanes because they're Gen 5 and Gen 4, but there's less of them. So if you like using older add-in cards like the 9211 that I've got here, or the SATA card, or even the PLX chip that they're using for NVMe, all of those run at Gen 3, or even Gen 2 for the 9211, I think. So they're not that happy running with PCIe Gen 4 lanes, but only 4 of them. They'd rather have a whole bunch of slow lanes. That is a disadvantage if you're not buying brand new add-in cards. You might be running them at a lower lane count because the CPU supports really fast lanes instead of a lot of lanes. So as for lanes specifically, we've got 2 PCIe Gen 5 by 8 lane slots. So that's slot 1 and slot 4. And they're far enough apart that you could put 2 of those real big 3 wide chonker graphics cards if you actually need that kind of performance. You probably don't. Then you'd block off all the rest of your PCIe cards and be happy. In addition to the 2 Gen 5 lanes, we have 4 sources of Gen 4. So we have 2 M.2 slots. They're both Gen 4 by 4 lanes. And we have 2 add-in card slots, slot 2 and slot 3. They're Gen 4 by 4 lanes. Out of the box, slot 1, 2, and 3 are all empty. So you could put in one 3-slot GPU or smaller GPU without moving anything around. Now the 4th slot, that's an X8 slot, that has the PLX card in it. So they're running it at Gen 3 by 8 lanes. Now the next 2 slots, slots 5 and 6, these are both PCIe Gen 3 by 4 lanes each. And one of these we have our SATA card, and the other one we have a 10 gigabit NIC. This uses the Aquantia AQC 113, I believe, multi-gig NIC, so it can do 2.5, 5, and 10 gig. I think that's a great choice for this system. And all the way to the bottom, we have a PCI slot, just plain PCI. It's a workstation thing, I guess. People still run ancient cards and their stuff, so we got one just in case. Also on the topic of PCI Express, IOMMU groupings and ACS support are very important. So far, I put cards in every single slot, and all of them are on separate IOMMU groups. So both M.2s, all 6 PCIe slots, all separate. So every single slot has its own IOMMU group. That's great, but I want to take this a step further. Now this is one of my Mellon-X ConnectX-4 NICs, and this supports a feature called SRIOV, Single Root I/O Virtualization. So basically, this network card here can support 127 virtual functions, and essentially to the PCI topology, this looks like there's 127 more PCI devices coming off this one chip. And you can individually pass those 127 virtual NICs to separate virtual machines using PCI pass-through. However, doing that requires some support from the IOMMU and also PCI ACS. So I wanted to make sure that not only does this work on the slots that go directly to the CPU, which are the 2 PCIe Gen 5 by 8 slots, but also the Gen 4 by 4 and Gen 3 by 4 slots that go through the chipset. And I'm happy to confirm, yes, this does work even off the slots from the chipset. So on some of my other systems, like the box PC over there, I have to use this card in the slot that goes direct to the CPU because the chipset doesn't support ACS, but this chipset does. So this one, I can pass through my SRIOV virtual functions up to the VMs. Also, the PLX card here that this came with for the U.2, U.3, that one has 8 downstream ports, and each of those have their own IOMMU group as well. So you can PCI pass through individual U.2 drives with the PLX chip that came with this thing. So that's pretty cool. Now also, a consequence of choosing a workstation class board is we get some of the advantages of server class hardware, specifically ECC memory. So some people are all about ECC memory. I personally am not so all about it. Yes, it's very good to have if you can afford it. I wouldn't pay a ton extra for ECC. So here they've chosen the W680. That platform supports unbuffered ECC memory, and they've chosen to include 32 gigs on this model. I personally think that's a little bit low. I would have gone for 64 gigs just to get the dual channel config instead of a single 32 gig stick. Now because they've only put one stick in, you can put only one more stick in to get up to dual channel config, which is only one stick. You don't have to buy 2 sticks and replace the 2 sticks that are there, for example. There are 3 empty slots though, so you could buy 3 more 32 gig sticks and get up to 128 gigs. In case you're wondering, memory it comes with is DDR5 5600 megatransfers. This is ECC unregistered memory, so there's 10 memory chips here instead of the usual 8. The extra 2 chips on each half bank in DDR5 are for the error correcting code. This memory is also made by and branded by SK Hynix, so it's common workstation memory. Also features built into the board, we have a serial port, 2 display ports, and HDMI, an Intel i219 1 gigabit NIC, and we also have an Intel i225 or i226 2.5 gig NIC on the board as well. So I'm using the 10 gig NIC that OpenNAS has included, but you also have a dedicated 2.5 and a 1 gig NIC as well. Also on the motherboard, we have an absurd number of serial COM ports, and in case you're an unrated user, there's also 2 USB ports on the motherboard for flash drives. So one downside of not using a server motherboard here is that we don't have something like IPMI remote management. But we do have something pretty cool instead. It's called Intel AMT. So since this is a workstation chipset, it supports AMT. We need a NIC with a LM suffix. In this case, that's our 2.5 gig NIC, the i226. So I hooked up the i226 on my LAN, went to the BIOS, configured AMT enough that I could configure it again from here. The BIOS didn't let me configure IPv6, but once I got into the web UI, it did. So I can come in here and ask it for stuff. I mean, I can't copy and paste because it's just a copy of the screen, but so I've got this thing open in Mesh Central, and we can see it. I can do commands and stuff and remote manage it. One problem I noticed is that if there's no displays connected physically, AMT gets very confused, and I think that's because the GPU just doesn't render anything if there's no displays connected. So I plugged in a KVM, and even without actually looking at the KVM, just having something on that HDMI port made AMT work fine. So you might need one of those little like dummy plugs, I guess, to get it to work. But other than that, it's very functional. It's obviously not the same as IPMI, but it gets you partway there. And I think the last thing up here in this view is the power supply. So they've used a Thermaltake SFX 450 watt unit. However, it's mounted in a bracket into an ATX style hole. So if you replace this power supply, you can go with either SFX or ATX depending on what you want. Now, some of you will probably complain that 450 watts is low, and for a desktop or a workstation that would be. But this is not that, this is a server. And they're trying to get their idle power consumption very low. And since power supplies are very inefficient at like less than 10% load, that means that they need to have a power supply that is small enough that it's not running at 5% load at idle all the time. So I've got this thing running now, it's got all the add-in cards in it, it's got a bunch of drives in it, and I'm pulling 70 watts of the wall. So they claim, what do they claim? So they're claiming 30 watt for the non-pro and 36 watt for the pro without drives. Now, I measured it at around 44 watts at the wall at idle. Now this was running with Proxmox with the default CPU governors, so this probably could be tuned a bit better, but that's the number I've got. To get those numbers, you basically can't run the power supply at 5%. So 450 watts, that's perfectly adequate for all of the hardware they've included and fully populating all of the drives. If you're going to go and add in some big ass graphics card, of course it's not going to work, but I don't think that's really what this is for. Also, if you need to do transcoding, this has an Intel UHD 770 on the CPU. So one of the advantages of using a desktop CPU is they usually have pretty good integrated graphics. So you can use the iGPU on the 13th Gen i5 if you need to use transcoding. So if I'm going to replace all of my stuff with an OpenNAS, how would I come out in terms of power consumption? Well, I have a couple different power meters around here that will give me a bit of an idea. So I have a meter on that plug there. It's actually in the breaker panel, but it measures that plug there. And it's telling me 202 watts. That's this closet by itself. That includes the backup server, which is not on a UPS. That includes this guy, which is on the UPS, the network rack, and also everything that's powered over PoE. So I have a PoE switch here that powers cameras, access point stuff. All of that's included in this as well. So that's 202 watts. Now I put a kilowatt meter here that monitors just the 3 network switches. So the network switches alone, I'm at 140 watts. So that's 3 switches. One of them is a 10 gig switch, one of them is a PoE switch, and all the PoE powered devices. All of that 140 watts. So that means I got 60 watts going to the backup server, which is turned off, the BIG NAS with its 2 hard drives and 2 SSDs, and my fanless router. And so all of those 3 things would hypothetically be consolidated into the open NAS. I also have one more system. It's my box PC. That guy draws 36 watts really consistently, so I got him as well. So is the open NAS going to be lower than that? Well, I already measured the idle consumption is about 44 watts. I can add a couple watts per hard drive on top of that. Probably going to be doing work too. So, I don't know, maybe I'll break even or so. Probably reasonable. I also really hate the micro server, the backup server, so getting rid of that would make me very happy. One last thing in our hardware tour, fans. Now there's a dedicated fan plate for the drives that has 4 80mm fans. There's also 2 80mm exhaust fans on the rear, and 3, I think they're 140mm. They look bigger than 120 to me, on the front for intake. So the direction is front to back. They're all really quiet, and this thing has been powered up for all of the hardware tour I've shot so far. It's running with the fans going, and the top off too. So cooling is quite quiet. I would be perfectly fine having this in my rack. It's not going to be the loudest thing in there for sure. Network switches are way worse. But even if you have this out and about, it won't be that uncomfortable. I did put in a Mellanox card I was testing with some 25 gig a little bit ago. And man, that thing screamed. And I thought this unit was really loud, but then I realized it was just my NIC. So, oops. So when I started on this video, I had a couple different ideas on how I could take this thing. I had some project ideas. I still have those project ideas, so I'm still going to consider them for the future. But ultimately, I started doing some more deep dives into the technical specs, architecture, setup of this thing, all of the hardware they've chosen, and that just kind of felt like a whole video on its own. So that's what I made today. I also did heavily consider actually replacing all of my servers in the back with this, but ultimately the decision that led me to not do that was the fact that I'm going on a trip in a week and I didn't have time to deal with the network being broken while I'm gone. But this does have all the equipment I would need to migrate my backup server. I can put my SAS drives in one of these rows, connect one of these rows up to a SAS HPA, hook up the tape drive, move in my 16 terabyte drives and all my SSDs and all that stuff, and the router. I could virtualize that too, all in here. That would be functional and would probably save me a little bit of power over what I'm doing right now. If I were to go down that path, I would probably switch out the 10 gig NIC for 25 gig NIC. That's just more of a me thing. I like using SFP+ and SFP28 instead of RJ45, but I totally understand that most homelab people are probably not in the market for like fiber networking. That's why I think the Aquantia NIC they've chosen here makes a lot of sense. Now, as for the rest of this hardware for this thing, I feel like I've tried to find any sort of gotchas or stumbling blocks that you might have issues with depending on what you're using this for, and I haven't really found anything major. So, of course, you can scroll back through the 20 minutes to see all of the detailed explanations of how this thing is built, all the parts they've chosen, and I think the reasons why they've chosen them make sense in a lot of cases. Of course, there are some hardware choices that I would do differently personally, but I think that they're all relatively reasonable choices for a thing targeting this price point and this feature set. Now, the one concern I do have is they're using a crowdfunding platform, at least to get started. Now, I have this thing in my hand, on my bench, and it seems to be built quite well and quite fine. I know there are other people that also have units like this that have been produced. So it's not vaporware yet, but I am always relatively skeptical of crowdfunding platforms. And it seems like these guys have the funding and, I don't know how much funding they have, but it seems like they have far enough in development that they could go straight to a low production run as sort of a test instead of going to crowdfunding. But maybe that's what the crowdfunding is essentially a test production run to see what demand is. It's a pretty short crowdfund, so we'll see where they go from here. After the crowdfunding ends, I'd like to see them have some sort of configurator on their website. I think that would help a lot of people. Adding things like extra RAM or swapping out the SATA card for a SAS card, that kind of thing, I think would be a really popular option for a lot of people. Also, they're using a 6-port SATA card with a port expander, and allegedly some people have had problems with that in TrueNAS. I believe that's in TrueNAS Core though, not TrueNAS Scale, but don't quote me on that. I have not had any problems. I've been using that card with these 4 drives here in Linux with ZFS. Now for this model specifically, you bought a 3.5-inch unit, so I can see why only 4 of these would do U.2. U.2s don't really come in 3.5-inch. I've never seen them in 3.5-inch at least. I've always seen them in either 7mm or 15mm 2.5-inch. But I think for the 2.5-inch model, it would make sense for all 12 of those to support PCI Express. Even if they only include an 8-port PLX card, you can still connect the other 4 ports either directly to some of the places on the motherboard if you want to do that, or get a second PLX card. It is a really expensive card. It's like 220 bucks. But I think just having the backplane support, and I don't have one of those, so I can't tell if the backplane supports it, but to me that would make sense. If you're getting 2.5, you're probably going to want to be doing either 2.5-inch SSDs, or which are going to be either SATA or NVMe. And then obviously for the Pro version, a SAS card instead of a SATA card would probably make sense to me, or at least the option to swap that out for a price difference. One other very small nitpick I noticed, the front of the case here is USB 3 and USB Type-C, which is also USB 3. And these work, but they don't work at USB 3. So there's a cable that comes over here that's a front panel USB 3. It's not a front panel Type-C connector. It's just a USB 3 connector. So this is not going to be doing display, stuff like that, which is fine. But they have that connected to a USB 2 port on the motherboard because the workstation motherboard doesn't have a USB 3 header. And I totally understand there's a lot of I/O on this motherboard with a W680 chipset, a ton of PCIe lanes, but just getting rid of the blue connector, I think, would make a lot of sense to me. So I hardly ever plug stuff into my servers, and if I do, they're always keyboards and mice. Having a Type-C, even if it's just USB 2, would make sense, but just not having the expectation that this is a super speed when it's actually only USB 2, I think would be clearer. Now there are an absolute ton of USB 3 ports on the back. There's also a whole bunch of COM ports, which I thought was kind of weird, but I guess this is sort of like a workstation industrial chipset. It makes some sense to me. I do like using serial ports for managing servers sometimes. I've made a whole video up on that before, but so you can do that with this with the onboard COM port. I also got to try Intel AMT for the first time in this video, and it took me a very long time to figure out what I was doing wrong. And what I was doing wrong was that I was using the 1 gigabit NIC. I just assumed the 1 gig NIC off the chipset would be the one that did AMT, and that was not. It's 2.5 gig NIC. Speaking of that 1 gig NIC, that 1 gig NIC is the only device in the system that shares IOMMU groups. So the chipset itself has some I/O. It has 4 of the SATA ports that go to 4 of these drives, by the way. And it also has the PCI link to the i219 1 gigabit NIC. And those things are together in one IOMMU group. So if you want to pass through the chipset SATA and the i219 and all of those things, those are stuck together with the chipset. Now the i226, the 2.5 gig, that one does have its own IOMMU group, even though it's on the motherboard. And every single slot on the back plane and both the M.2s also have their own IOMMU group separately. It's just the i219 and the chipset SATA that are stuck together. In theory, this CPU also does support SRIOV for the graphics card, which seems like it would be kind of weird to split up a graphics card into 7 virtual functions, but I'm sure I'll have a video on that coming up soon because it's really cool. Now, internal GPUs aren't the most powerful. This is not a weak internal GPU though. It's certainly valuable. So I'm sure doing SRIOV on that would be mostly for applications that are doing like really basic graphic acceleration. So if you wanted to have like 4 virtual desktops, the system could probably do 4 virtual desktops, maybe if you add some more RAM. And the iGPU might be enough to deal with like basic Windows session rendering, that kind of thing. So I guess the last thing we should talk about is the price. Where does this sit in terms of price? I should probably open the pricing up. Okay, so currently they have 6 options on sale. You can get either the R12 or the D12, just the case. You can get the base model fully assembled or the Pro model fully assembled for each the R12 and D12. This version I have right here is the R12 Pro, and that one is $1,860. That includes everything in this video. I didn't mention any PCIe cards that it doesn't come with, I don't think. So that includes the case, the backplanes, no drives, power supply, CPU, cooler, the PLX card, the SATA card, 10 gig NIC, all the cables, all pre-wired. So for me, this would be competing with something like a 45 drives HL15. So the HL15 is shorter, it's only 4U, it's deeper, so it wouldn't fit in my rack, which is a key note for me, but might not be important at all for you. And the 45 drives one is significantly more expensive because they're using server components, using a Supermicro server motherboard and an Intel Xeon processor instead of a Core processor. So by using the Core i5 here, these guys have saved quite a bit of money, I think. Benefits either way. So that's why I'm trying to make these trade-offs clear for you guys so you guys can make the best decision for you. Now, as to what it would actually cost you to build this yourself, I mean, there's quite a bit of parts in here. So there's a workstation motherboard, the CPU, 32 gigs of ECC RAM, the PLX card, SATA card, 10 gig NIC, chassis, backplane cables, power supply. So add up what all of that's worth to you and assembly. Ultimately, I think that the 1860 price is very reasonable. It fits well in the market segment. They're coming in under 45 drives. You're getting workstation class components instead of server class components. I think most people in the home lab space would prefer having the Core i5 instead of the Xeon for this kind of home workload. It's obviously not going to be in a business server. I mean, it probably will end up in quite a few businesses, but it's not intended for that. So I'm sure you guys will talk all about this thing in the comments. I've put links down below to where you can get this. Currently as an Indiegogo, as I said, I hope they transition in the next few months to their own website. I don't know if that'll happen or not, but that's what I hope to see them do long term, is to have their own sort of configurator where you can add options. I think that would be a great thing for them. So feel free to comment about it below, and yeah. So since they were kind enough to send me a bag of Lay's ketchup chips made in Canada, I probably should try them. Now, I will say this is not exactly my favorite taste, but I guess you guys are going to enjoy this with me together. It's such a weird smell. Opening a bag of potato chips that smells like a hot dog. Oh, and they're even red too. It's not a great taste, I don't think. It's kind of odd. Kind of sour almost. I was not expecting that from ketchup, but I guess it does faithfully taste like ketchup. It's just that you usually wouldn't eat ketchup like by itself, and this kind of tastes like you're pouring ketchup like straight out of the bottle into your mouth. Well, it's a thing, I guess. So yeah, do the like and subscribe. Discord server link down below if you want to chat with me. All the good stuff. See you guys in the next adventure.